Um, okay, so let's get started. I'm Greg Calcanio, the Alumni Director here at St. Francis, and I'm excited to have Alex Harr join us. Alex is a member of the class of 2015, and he's going to talk today to us about product design and artificial intelligence. So, first, I'll read a quick bio on Alex and then ask him some questions, and he'll get to tell us his story. So, Alex graduated from St. Francis 6 years ago. He's in the class of 2015. During his time there, Alex was active in the Christmas Comedy Club, Rally Board. He swam and played water polo all 4 years and won a CCS championship. And he was also on the homecoming court. While he was in high school, Alex was also interning at HP, small startups, and marketing agencies. For undergrad, Alex went to the University of Washington, where he received a Bachelor's of Science in Human-Centered Design and Engineering with a focus in human-computer interaction. While attending UW, he worked for a startup who specializes in enterprise cloud storage and AI, starting as a product management intern and getting promoted to lead UX designer. For his current job, Alex is working in Seattle as a product designer for a stealth startup that uses artificial intelligence, more specifically natural language processing, to connect and make sense of unstructured data. Some of Alex's fondest memories at St. Francis were getting in trouble for not shaving by Mr. Gray Lee, football games, rallies, Brazil immersion trip, and beating Bellarmine in water polo and swimming. So thank you, Alex. We really appreciate you being here today. We have a couple questions for you, and then kind of we'll let you go. Um, first thing was, how did you end up at St. Francis? Was it family connection? Did you live in the area? Friends going there?
Yeah, so um, my sister, who's a year above me, went there, and so she's super about it. And I would do some of those discovery trips, those and learn about the whole campus. And so ultimately we ended up going there, and I was always known as Kaylee's Harr brother because my sister, she had won the Peter Maury Award. I mean, everyone knew her, and she was like senior class president. So it's definitely, living a little bit in my sister's shadow with that.
Very cool. What were some of your favorite memories at St. Francis? I know I read a couple in your bio, but anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, first thing, like I do a variety of things. Like I love, talking to people. Also, as like, big sports fanatic. I played football my freshman year as well, and then swimming and water polo. But honestly, I don't know if Christmas Comedy Club is still around. I think it's like the Improv Club.
Yeah.
Um, And so it was like Christmas Comedy Club was so much fun because I would, after practice, I would go and we'd like write all these sketches, and then like we had this performance at the end of the year during Christmas, and like we did some like weird stuff. Like I played this part of called a hair fairy, and so basically you'd run around and like throw hair at the audience, and like it was supposed to be like almost like some type of fairy like throwing dust. That was really really fun, even though it was like pretty stupid. Um, and then nothing is like homecoming court. Anything to do with rallies, like that was by far the best. Like I remember, Drumline coming out and like I think like St. Francis has such a cool program, Drumline. I know they work their butts off at that and getting chills with that. But I think probably the biggest thing was like my Brazil immersion trip because like it was pretty life changing. We went to for about 10 days, basically called Campinas, and we got to experience like pretty extreme poverty, and that really like kind of gave me perspective on life, of like how well we have it, in the United States. Like especially like right now, United Americans are kind of getting a bad rap. But like I had this one conversation with this elder man who was like a bricklayer, and he said he's lost his wife like 2 years ago. I was like, typical saying, I'm sorry for your loss, and he just started crying. I'm like, you Americans are so nice, and like that experience, I was like, made me start crying, and I'm like, just this genuine human connection. Like I think St. Francis really, no other place offers that. And then finally, like senior retreat, all the retreats, like I mean, all the programs are just really well catered to, like developing yourself and like really like belonging to a sense of community.
Good. Um, who is your favorite teacher and why?
It's a mix up between Mr. Deneen and Mr. DiCarlo. Mr. Deneen, like I said before, I mean, the fact you just walk into his American history class and he's just strumming a guitar is just crazy to me. And I mean, he wasn't that good at the time, and he'd just be singing. I think he was really into Coldplay at the time. And then like we'd learn a ton, and like we would just learn through like group effort, and like you do your readings and stuff, and you'd have your group tests, and like it was very low key because you know like in my life, and like I just got out of high school and or undergrad. Like learning is like taken so seriously, and I honestly think that's almost like a failure of the education system, because learning's about making mistakes and having fun. And like through his class, like it was about having fun. I mean, you have to stand up as quickly as possible and do these um like comedy points if you're funny. And so it was like very low key. And then as Mr. DiCarlo, I took I think two of his classes. The last one was calc, and like I wasn't the best student. I definitely goofed off a lot. But like like school came pretty easy to me, and like he was so nice, like really understanding, and also genuinely cared about people. Like he really cared about you personally, and always had the fondest memories in his class.
Very cool. What would you do differently if you had a chance to redo your time at St. Francis?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I was kind of pretty mischievous at school. Definitely found myself, I don't know if to say this, but like in detention quite a bit, just for like
Just don't go into any details because
I won't. But like like I said, school came relatively easy to me, and like I kind of wish I worked a little harder at St. Francis, and like think looking back, I definitely could put more effort, and also procrastinating a ton. I remember my sister was just as bad, but like, staying up pretty late. And I definitely wish I solidified, a good working schedule then, because it came later and bit me in the butt when I was in college, which stuff is a lot more serious and harder than. But to be honest, like I wouldn't really redo much, because I literally had the time of my life at St. Francis, and like, the friends I made there, I'm still talking to people, the sports, and just all the experiences I wouldn't redo.
great. Who has been a mentor or a big influence in your life?
Yeah, so I guess during the time in like high school, I didn't really have, a mentor, but like for me, like I'm really into like productivity and like productivity hacks and like kind of bettering myself. So right now it'd be like, I don't know if David Goggins, I don't know if you heard of him, but he's this Navy SEAL who went through like all these extreme things and like all these setbacks, and now he's like an ultra marathon runner. And he, preaches the like kind of gospel, like life is a lot of pain, but like once you overcome that pain, like, like life is amazing. It's like that's what I really like strive for. Is like I always push myself in every instance, whatever it's like social, intellectual, and just trying my best at everything I do.
So, kind of the general question is, um, tell us your story. How'd you get where you are? What are you doing now?
Yeah.
What will day look like? All that good stuff.
Um, so I guess during at like high school, I was pretty active in like internships, and it's in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and like a lot of my friends are pretty well connected. And so I was leveraging like internships during high school, which most people don't do internships till college. And like for me, like I'm more of a practical learner. Like I want to throw myself into like the pits of everything. And like so I started out doing an internship at this marketing agency, where we went around to these different um, startups, and you're basically creating videos, creating content, designing stuff. And like that was really cool to me. That's what like really got me into like the whole tech world. And so I bounced around the next summer, and this I started out doing it for my sophomore year. Next summer I did HP, which I was a marketing content creator. So I was literally creating videos with these other younger people, just goofing around in this like multi-million-dollar studio. I'm just making funny videos, even though we weren't supposed to. But then like creating internal content, and really learning like the ins and outs of like what it means to like start working in these big companies, and also at a really young age. And then finally ended up at this doing more marketing work Um, but at the end of like, high school and I graduate, I didn't really like marketing. I realized it's, I mean, a lot of writing, which I do now, but like, it wasn't my cup of tea. And then, I went to UW in 2015. I joined a fraternity, which, I do highly suggest. We always hear about these like horrible things, but the fraternity I joined was very like intellectually founded. Like at UW, it's a pretty competitive school and like pretty hard school. We were all in like science majors, and my whole class, my whole fraternity had a 3.5 or higher, when the average engineering GPA was like a 2.8. And so it was like really cool. But I did goof around a lot. And during that time, I had a lot of setbacks, like, as you got older, like, some mental issues. And then you get into like at UW, you had to apply to your major. And so I got rejected to basically two of my majors of my choice because like I said, I didn't really have that solidified working schedule and all that stuff. And so it really buckled down. And then I got into my major called human-centered design and engineering. And it's honestly a mouthful. I know a lot of people don't really know what it is. I have to keep telling my mom like what I graduated in. But essentially what it is, it's if it's like, you have like pretty hardcore engineering, we'll say software engineering, which is like coding, you're building applications. And then you also have design, which basically you're designing these applications. So like what analogy I like to use is take Facebook, for example. Facebook has all these processes running in the background. Like if you add a friend, there's this code that's triggering, all this stuff. But then the design portion of it's like, how do we make that simple for users? It's like for people like, I don't know, elderly people who just get on, like we have to make this super, super simple, even though it's really complex. And so pretty much that's what the major's about, is like creating these digital experiences for everyday users. And that's what kind of was ushered into like Steve Jobs and Apple. And like, that's when they really started paying for this thing called user experience. Um, and during this
Can
time,
I ask you a question about your major? Is that a pretty common major? Is it pretty unique to like UW? So a lot of students are going to be listening to this, and is
Mhm.
that something that's a pretty common major that they could go to?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily so HCDE, just the title is straight up from UW, and it's like a top 3 program in the nation. And it's now coming more about like it's also called human factors, human factors engineering, human computer interaction, but like it's mostly, I would say, West Coast schools who are now doing it, since it's a lot of technology is booming out of here. But it's still a relatively new field. And like, but there's always, I can talk about this later, but there's always different segues in getting into what I do, what majors I would suggest that you can do. But I can get that into that right now, or we can save that.
No, it just popped into my head, so I figured I'd ask.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. But yeah, so at my major, it was like, you know, typically these majors at UW, like there was 60,000 people who went to UW, including like grad and undergrad. And typically these programs, have 1,000 people, but my cohort had only 40 people, and it had like a 4% acceptance rate, and thousands of people applied to it. So I was really, really lucky. Not lucky because I worked my butt off, but really like privileged to be in this program. And we did amazing things. I mean, like I worked with UW to basically redesign their entire online learning platform as a junior. And so this is basically working with, developers or software engineers who went through a bunch of coding, doing a bunch of user interviews. Like what we're doing right now is essentially, user interview. And then, creating these requirements, and then basically redesigning their online learning system to better suit students, especially during this pandemic. I also worked with the city of Seattle to basically redesign their traffic center, basically using AI to reroute calls based off of their severity. It's pretty like high level, but I mean, you don't really hear of this until like you're graduating, you're like 10 years in industry, and yet I'm doing this as a 21-year-old. And then like some other cool things, like it's very research heavy. And so one of the coolest things I honestly think I've done in terms of projects is I was in this visualization class. We basically took bioluminescent algae, and we used this thing called Arduinos, which are these microcomputers, and you basically program them to basically injects air bubbles into these like containers of bioluminescent algae. And so we took all the volcanic data from the Cascade region, and then we programmed basically the severity of that volcano and basically how much disturbance it would cause this water. And so we created a visualization with this algae, because algae, once you disturb it, it starts lighting up, especially the one in the Pacific Northwest region. So that was really cool. Like major's awesome, a lot of writing. But then while I was doing this again, because I loved getting involved in internship. So like my sophomore year, even before I got into the major, I was doing an internship at this place called Panzer, and again, I was leveraging, family connections, and like, don't be like my advice, don't be afraid to do that. Like that's connections rule the world, and like that's how I got this job. And then so I was started as a product management intern, and like so product management, it kind of relates to product development and product design is essentially it's like a life cycle of a product. So let's take Facebook for example. So like we'll say news feed. So before, like you can only friend people, but then we wanted to create a whole posting system. So you first start with this feature definition. In order to define what newsfeed is going to be, this feature, you have to do a bunch of research. And so I at the time was doing a bunch of research with different stakeholders like sales, customers, and these people are like really well experienced, and I'm only like 21, and I'm asking these really dumb questions, and they're like, who is this kid? Kind of embarrassing, but again, I was like really confident. I was like, let me just do this. And then you ask these questions, and then you basically define what you're trying to build. And so again, for Facebook, we did all this research. We defined that when we build this news feed and people want to post, at that point, I was doing a mix of this management and design. So I started designing and literally just whiteboarding on Scratch. Looked like crap. I mean, literally, it was just jumbled stuff, and I'm showing it to like executives, like this is what we're going to do, and then got approval, and then you basically design this in these tools called like Sketch, Illustrator, um, and then you iterate on it. You do some user testing, basically get in front of customers. So for newsfeed, I'd be designing these posts, I get in front of customers, and they test upon it. And then finally, you pass it off in engineering, which is then you manage like as a 21-year-old, I was managing a team of like 20 engineers in China developing this one feature. And again, I was an intern, so I had a lot of leeway in this. And then finally, you monitor the delivery of it by meeting with customers. And so, that was when I was a 21-year-old kid. Like I was managing all this stuff, and then I was basically in charge of this thing called a setup wizard. And so I ended up delivering this, and the executives loved it so much. I was promoted to full-time PM/designer during the summer, and also part-time in the school year. And again, like I was doing a lot of part-time work while I was getting an engineering degree. So it's kind of, testament, like I started working my butt off, and like I was working, 60, 70 hours. Not saying it's for everyone, but like I really enjoyed the work. Um, and during this internship, once I was full time, I started then owning basically the whole life cycle of these two products that were generating, $10 million in revenue. And I haven't even graduated college yet. And like it was such a cool experience. Like during this time, also, I went to China, and I met with, because we had a team of like 120 engineers. I met with the team, and they took me around to China, ate some really crazy food. I had like pig's blood and first time. It was actually pretty good. But like this whole experience kind of shaped me, like just this whole job. And I did this, from my sophomore year all the way to when I graduated. And this whole experience really shaped like who I am today, because, people like are really intimidated to like ask for things they want in the world. And like I took it to myself. I was like no way, like I'm gonna like be the best that I want to be. And so like I was so scared, and like I was thrown into it. I didn't know like half the things I was doing, but I just went with it. And so this gave me a ton of confidence. And so once I graduated, I then started like expecting the best for myself. And like I was going after these jobs, titles of product designer, product manager. And you would read the description, it'd be like 10 years of experience, and like you have to use all these qualifications, and I would apply to it. But then, after I think it took a month, I started leveraging connections. Like I said, it's really good to make connections. And then I started working a month contract work for this job called DeepGram, which DeepGram is a San Francisco-based startup that uses AI, more specifically natural language processing. And natural language is essentially how we're talking. So the whole company was founded on, you can take these transcripts, we'll build this thing called a model. And so a model is just, a bunch of algorithms, or an algorithm that spits out certain information. So we'll feed this transcript into, this audio recording into this model, and then output a human readable transcript. And also within the transcript, you can search basically based off of context. So say for this interview, we can put this this audio recording. I can then search uh, based off of like, when was Alex mad or when was Alex happy, and it would retrieve all this information and show it out to you. So I did this contract work for about a month, and honestly, it was brutal. Definitely, like I realized, like because I was just kind of trying to get or take what I could get because I was, applying such like pretty high tier jobs, and I was brutal. Like I was working 80 hours a week. I was not happy. And it was a contract to hire job because I was just stressed out the entire time. But I ended up building this entire platform that I think would have normally taken 6 months, and I did it in a month. And that's from research all the way, given I didn't code it, but basically research definition, um, all the way to, design presentation. Here's the like functional requirements. I'm getting pretty engineering heavy. Um, and then unfortunately, I remember getting a call, and I was like, yeah, we're not going to continue you're not going to get the full-time job. And I'm like, jaw dropped. And I'll be real, I just started, like, after I started crying, like I worked my butt off. And like kind of goes to show, like, you can be on the top of the world, but like there's definitely a lot of humbling experiences that you have. And so from then was started applying to other jobs. This is where I landed at this current company. I was called Panda AI. Can't really say too much about it, but it's essentially you take these modern AI models, which again just algorithms, and you apply it to this thing called unstructured data. And so unstructured data could be like all the text you put into Google. It could be just like the way we're talking transcripts, and basically make sense out of this data just everywhere. And so it provides this, this cool visualization, like all this stuff, so you can make sense of everything. Um, but yeah, like that's kind of, where I'm at currently. And so yeah, but in my job right now, it's a lot of things because it's an 8-person startup. And so we just got seed funding, meaning that basically you have a proof of concept of like, this is what we want to do, and then you get a little money from investors, and then you start building out the product. But like, I guess, my day to day is it's pretty, like, it varies, but like I'm not even just doing uh I'm not even just doing like design work, I'm not doing product management work, but I'm also doing sales, I'm doing marketing. So it's a lot of different things. That's what I really enjoy, because I don't want to be completely confined to just one thing. But I get to talk with customers. I love talking with people. I get to talk with, engineering. I define basically the future of the product. I'm like working directly with the CEO, and the team I'm working with is incredible. Like the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, he was head of pretty much like NLP, which natural language processing, or like, AI at Qualtrics, which Qualtrics is the leader of data analytics, head at Twitter, head at Amazon. So very brilliant people, and was born out of this incubator program called Allen Institute, which is a world-renowned AI incubator program at UW. So lots of cool stuff. But yeah, again, day to day, I wake up, typically have some meetings, and then from then I use this thing called a Pomodoro technique, and I just work on what I need to get done for about 2 hours, do some more meetings, and then end the day with basically I have to finish up any other tasks that I'm trying to accomplish.
So have you, since you've been at Panda AI, I'm going to assume it's been since the pandemic. So is there an office that you would normally go into, or how's that working?
Yeah, so there's no office currently. So it's like, because I joined about 4 months ago. So there's no office, it's all online. it definitely, I mean, I know teachers and students are experiencing the same. It's like Zoom fatigue. It sucks. Like you definitely want to be in the office. You want to be with people. It's good in some respects, but yeah, like we're not planning on having a new office for about a year. Um,
Um, Anybody else have questions for Alex right now on current day-to-day stuff?
What do you like most of this joining a startup and being in that type of culture? What's the exciting aspect? Because I think a lot of students, I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to get in the startup, and hopefully it's a home run, and
mhm, mhm.
and everything kind of falls in place after that. What's your experience been?
Yeah, so like I've worked in, big companies like HP, but then I much prefer startups because, it's a lot smaller. Like communication is super easy. Like once you go back to the office, I could literally walk up to you, Mr. Speckman, tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, what's up?" and then ask you a question. And everyone's super, super motivated. Like everyone is typically people who work at, I think I found like, smaller startups, like you're taking on a huge amount of risk. Like I could be going to this big firm where I'm going to make a very comfortable salary, but I'm working at a startup. I'm getting this pretty big pay cut. And in terms of getting returning, stock options with basically, if the company does well, you're going to be really rewarded for it. That's one element, but also just like the amount of innovation that goes on in such a short amount of time. Like I'm like with Panda's instance, like when I started, we literally just had this like very basic prototype. Prototype is just, like a design with this back end that, barely functioning product all the way to like within 4 months, having it in customers' hands and people loving it. And that's such a really cool thing and satisfying thing where you put all this time and effort in such a short amount of time, and it's you get real hands-on like feedback versus if I'm at if I'm working at Facebook, I'm working on this tiny little feature. It could be a plus button, and I'm spending 6 months on that. And like, even though I'm getting paid pretty well from that position, like I don't really want to enjoy that. Like I want to work on more big picture things. So I would say like if you really want to work on big picture things and like you're willing to put in the work, I think working at a startup is way more valuable and um, more fun and rewarding than working at a bigger firm. Um, but yeah, I can also jump into like I know I kind of briefly went over my day to day, but I can go into more specifics if you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so typically like I'll just give more background about product design and product management. Like a product designer's job is basically make a whole experience, basically back to Facebook, as easy as possible. And so what I typically do is I typically interview like with customers and figure out what pain points they have. And so from those pain points, and then start this whole ideation process. And like I work with these other people, and so we literally typically sit in a virtual room, and we start brainstorming about certain ideas, and then we do this thing called concept testing, where you basically design certain little features and just scratch like little scratch paper, and then you get in front of customers and you show it to them, and you're like, hey, is this something you want? And so you start testing them on that, and you combine ideas into one solidified idea, and then you start defining the requirements. Basically, they're called user stories of this one feature. So back to the newsfeed, you basically start defining, hey, this has to have a social aspect, where you can post, you can comment. This also has to include photos, and so you start spelling out all this information, and then finally you start designing it, designing this whole feature, and then you deliver it to engineering, and then you start monitoring that whole how well it's doing within customers. So that's like typically, my day to day in terms of product design and product management. But at the same time, working to startup and doing a bunch of customer calls. I'm in sales, which is very new to me. Like I just started doing sales, and it's pretty fun. Get to talk to customers and figure out what they need. Um, and so like yeah, what startups also a big thing with them is you learn a ton. Like you're not just doing one thing. Like again, you get thrown into stuff, but can you do this? And you just say yes, even though you can't. And so you just learn how to do it. And so like I said, you learn sales, I've learned marketing. Um, so you're just really thrown into it, and kind of required to learn.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it kind of goes to your original comment of, being open to failure and taking risks. It seems that that kind of went a little bit with your personality that the startup went ahead and offered you. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, for students to hear that is important, particularly going into different types of tech jobs.
Mhm.
One thing would be, how many different experiences have you had since you've graduated in the tech fields, counting your internships, jobs, and stuff like that? Because I think one thing, for like a lot of us, we've been at St. Francis for a long time, and that's been our deal. But that's not so much the case for kids nowadays and in the tech field
Mhm.
specifically.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still gonna kind of break up my stuff at Panzera because I spent 4 years there while I was in school, but I was doing a variety of roles. I mean, I would say like typically, including my high school experience, I would probably did 4 to 5 different like internships per se. And like again, I was pretty different. Like none of my friends did that in high school. I wouldn't say that's necessarily required to get into the tech world. I just really enjoyed doing it. And I wasn't like a fan of traditional education um, because I wanted to take practical knowledge and put it somewhere. And so like for me, like what I would definitely recommend if you're trying to get into tech, whether it be if you want to do sales, you want to do marketing and do business, um, or like the job that I do is that when you're in college or wherever you go, just make sure to start putting projects under your belt. Like definitely your junior year, you need to be like pretty relentless in what you're applying to for internships. Because like I know a lot of people from my major who, again, it's a top 3 major in the nation, yet they don't have a job yet. And it's because they didn't do internships. So that's one thing I would really, really stress. But more specifically for my field, like I honestly, like now that I've graduated and like I'm really lucky to go to this program, I don't necessarily think like going to undergrad sometimes is necessary if you're trying to do like for my track. Google right now is offering and Facebook are offering these tracks, I think it's like $300, where you basically it's a 6-month program, and when you graduate, you're essentially thrown into Google. And like Google is basically the pinnacle of all tech jobs if you're trying to be from the product side, because that ultimately you can go anywhere you want after that. But again, there is downsides to doing that track. You're not really getting that social aspect that college really educates you on. Because like for me, I definitely pushed myself in college, not only just with school, but from a social wise, because I kind of was like sometimes kind of shy in high school. I mean, I had stuck with my friend group. I mean, I did a lot of these things, but definitely like on the inside, I was like screaming inside. But then, I started doing these things where I started like every day at college, I would try to meet someone new and I would start talking to them. And that's when I really started like, grow socially. And so I think college also teaches you that, how to interact with people, but also big thing is, how to like live and work with difficult people, because you're going to meet so many people like you don't really like. And like, that's fine because it's different personality mixes, but you really need to learn how to work with those people. And I think college really teaches you that, and also the whole networking aspects. Um, but yeah, back to your original question, Mr. Speckman, I would say like, definitely having an internship under your belt. And then after the end of the internship, make sure like when you're doing this, track certain key performance indicators. So basically for me, I would write down, I created 3 features within Panzera that had, a 20% increase in customer satisfaction. And you can be a little finicky about it. You can do a little white lies on this because, big numbers, like just put numbers on. And so that's what I would recommend. Definitely have that internship because it's going to be a pretty hard time once you graduate if you don't.
Thank you. Also, you were pretty outgoing when you were here at St. Francis. What were some of the, I don't know, maybe the aha moments to realize that you could up your game a little bit? Because oftentimes students are, a little reticent to reach out and talk to teachers. I mean, that's one reason why we have collaboration to help ingrain that, it's okay to talk to teachers as a transferable skill for when you go to college. But
Mhm.
creating that network and talking to people, what were some of the moments that you kind of went, okay, I can be comfortable, I've got an equal voice, or kind of overcoming that hurdle?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think like speaking with teachers, I think it was like when I was, I did comp sci with Mr. Chech. And like I was struggling. And so like I realized like I got to this point where I was like wasn't doing well, and I was like definitely I just wasn't afraid to ask anymore because I was like hurting so much in this class. But also like I would say like just putting myself out there more was probably Christmas Comedy Club. I think it's really good to honestly make fun of yourself, and like don't be afraid like to not like, people will kind of laugh, but at the end of the day, like who cares? Like a big thing, like who cares what other people think? I know everyone talks about, but like living it, I mean, it's hard. Like I was senior class president, and speaking in front of the whole student body. I remember when I did my speech, I mean, I was sweaty, and I was like, oh my gosh, I hope no one sees me. And like that, I pushed myself in that instance. And after that, I felt amazing. And those kind of moments, I was like, I can talk to anyone I want. Even though I will get that anxiety, like the anxiety will always remain. Like still, like when I'm working and like I have to speak in front of people, like big customers, I still get anxiety, like everyone does. And like, but living with it and realizing like, everyone has this. End of the day, like that's how I was able to make the decisions and like do these crazy interviews with jobs I'm by definition like not qualified for based off of years of experience and like what they're asking for. So that's I think, yeah, if I in high school, that's kind of led me to where I am, is just doing those experiences. And also my sister, I mean, my sister was crazy. Like Kaylee would just be out in lunch and like just talking to everyone and like doing all these speeches. Like everyone knew who she was. And she's like, oh yeah, that's Kaylee, like dancing, at like randomly, a little weird, but who cares? That's her personality. But yeah, recommend, who cares? Like end of the day, go talk to your teacher if you need help, because at the end of the day, they're there for you, and also it's going to better you in the long run.
Thank you. I think I'm glad you got it.
Yeah, but again, high school is hard. I mean, like just from like just like a lot of pressure um and like social wise, but like in a lot like looking back, it's still so much fun. Like I had a great time. And like no one's gonna remember that one instance that you had where you tripped and fell in the hallway, because it's end of the day, it's not a big deal.
So Alex, I guess a couple great things that I thought you touched on. Just getting out of your comfort zone, right? It's okay to fail. I think sometimes, especially in high school, everybody thinks everybody's perfect, right? With social media and everybody shows all just the good stuff, but getting outside your comfort zone, applying to jobs that you don't fit perfectly, you don't have 10 years experience, but still putting it out there, right? All they can say is no. Right? And you worked your tail off and you didn't get that contract, right? You did,
I know. I
but it happens. And how much better are you for having had that experience, right? Versus,
Yeah. Also cultural fit. Like, do I want to be working 80 hours a week? Hell, like, heck no,
no.
no way. But yeah, and like, one thing I wanted to say, but yeah, and like with trying things new, like, and also in high school, like, I would definitely, if you're trying to take this career path of like, getting out of your comfort zone, but also doing like design and engineering and product, like, definitely learn how to code right now. Because like I don't necessarily use the skill, but the foundation I have of like speaking with engineering, like I can speak on a whole nother technical level of like different architecture and like all these like new open source frameworks, but I understand how they work. I don't really know how to like, program in it, but like I understand how they work. And St. Francis did such a good job with like, comp sci, AP comp sci. I know they have like Girls Who Code. I know they have like all these programs. And like you got to realize like most schools don't have that, and like that is such a leg up on like other people, because by the time I hit, I got in my major, even though Like we had to take a couple of coding classes. I already knew how to code. Well, I saw everyone else is struggling. So that is one big thing I would say about that as well.
Kind of along those same lines, just even when you said, working at a startup that has 8 people, right, where you're also doing sales and marketing, which is much different, right, than all the stuff that you studied for. How does that help you just in the overall experience of how everything fits together?
Yeah, so like my ultimate goal is I want to become, head of product for a major company. And so like in order to have that, you have to have good people skills. And so also part of the reason why I was doing that talk to a new person a day, because I wanted to develop those people skills. Like I always, I could talk to people, but not like in a very like persuasive and suave way. And like that's what I wanted to develop. And like I think from a marketing and sales perspective, speaking to marketing is like once you understand like how people work and like how like you should be presenting information, like you definitely like you can craft these really creative things that really entice people um, into like buying something. Also with sales, like again, it just goes down to customer relations, like just the ability to talk with a customer and like like just talk about like their family, all that stuff, and developing these relationships. And you don't even talk about business yet. And then so once you like have a good like rapport between between you two, you then can start it's like, hey, here's what I can do for you. And then in the grand scheme of things, like where I want to head is because like as a head of product, I have to have those skills where I can basically speak from a creative, a social, and a engineering perspective. Because I'm going to be, hopefully, be going to flying out to deals, be able to talk from an engineering level, but also, pitching ideas, basically working with them to come up with an ultimate solution. But like I think a big problem with engineers nowadays, and like I can still speak to this because I am technically an engineer, is the social skills. It's like you get into school, they teach you like heads down, just do math, science, like that's great, like that's your cup of tea. But at the same time, you really do like if you want to set yourself apart, like you really do need to learn those talking points. You need to learn how to talk to people. You learn to communicate, because I've seen where engineers they get fired because they don't have people skills. Like they're kind of not the best people to work with, and like ultimately you have to have like startups are like a a well-oiled machine, and like if one part is squeaking, you're going to move that part. And I think sometimes engineers they um, don't think they need that sales side, but again, you can say vice versa with sales. Like you do need to have some technical understanding, and like spending that extra time learning that stuff will go a long way.
Did anybody have any other questions for Alex? Alex, I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. I apologize. I think, from a timing standpoint, I think we had kids in school, like we
And
said,
we're
a bunch of RSVPs, but I do know that some teachers are going to have some kids listen to this. Are you opposed at all to people reaching out to you in any way, shape, or form? And then the best way to do that, and I can be the conduit, or you can give that out, whatever works.
I mean, I would definitely love if you like if you ever have any questions, like you can definitely email me and I can just if you want to send out my email. Also about like career paths, like if for I guess for new grads, people want to listen to this like resumes and stuff because I've been through that. Or any other general questions. Definitely feel free. I would love to help out, in any way, shape, or form because St. Francis definitely gave me a lot, and I'm really value it. So we have Chris, I think you have a question. Oh, so I noticed you have a background in VR. How can students get involved now at a high school age? Um, yeah, so getting involved is a great question. I don't typically know too much about VR. Actually, I mean, right now there's these terms called augmented reality and virtual reality.
She said AI. Sorry.
Oh, AI. Yeah, so I mean, like, if you really are like want to get a leg up and like really want to get past in high school, there's a lot of courses on Udemy. And so I use Udemy a lot, and that's where I kind of got a good foundation of like what data science is, which data science is basically a foundation of AI. And so I took like 3 or 4, and at this point, that's when you start learning how to basically do like data wrangling. And so the whole foundation of like how you train AI and all that stuff is you have to understand how to parse through data. And so basically, once you learn how to clean up data, then there's these models that are there for you. And these courses teach you about it. Like I think this one of the courses I taught me is like how to create the Gmail spam filter. And it's pretty simple to do. I mean, it's good to have like a good background in object-oriented programming, and it's you typically in Python to like go through this course. But I highly recommend doing Udemy. There's Udacity, and also just YouTube. Like if you really want, like if you're really passionate about it and want to get involved, YouTube. All these also MIT has open courseware. It's the classes are pretty advanced, but you could check that out too as well. Um, but yeah, I think I would definitely recommend just using Udemy. Is there any like specifically you want to learn about AI? Because like there's definitely a big definition of what AI is, and like people throw it around a lot.
I'm curious to hear just a little brief part of what you do in that. I'm not sure if you touched on that before I got here.
Yeah, yeah. So like what I do with it, so it's a little bit different from like hardcore engineering perspective because I'm not the one um, creating these models and feeding this data in. But what I do is basically we have these advanced things called I don't know if I can really say much about it, but like we have these advanced models that basically um, can pick and choose certain information. So like for example, like right now you and I are talking, and this could be a transcript. So we send this transcript, and then we can have this model that will basically pick up people's names. And so it'll pick up my name, and then um, once you have the ability to basically click on that person's name and discover more information about them. And so it's basically taking all this unstructured data, which is our words, and then making structure out of it. And so it's basically learning about who you are, and then which is kind of crazy to think about it. And so my whole goal is typically like with these new like advancements in AIs to educate and also design for how to tell people what AI truly is. Like a big problem for me is like since AI is such a new field, there's little research behind it of how to basically help people who don't understand it use a product, because there's like I said, it's called name entity recognition. How do I tell people that like this technology can basically scan through all this stuff and then tell you all this information about it? And how do I tell you, like, how do you get confidence from that? Because like typically like you're reading something from a machine, I mean personally I would probably question that. And so my whole role was basically making that transition very easy and making all that really like complex technology easy to digest. I hope that answered your question. Great question.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any like specific things you did in your career path that you think helped you get to where you are today? Like a specific, I don't know, programming language or specific internship or something that like propelled you forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask, like, what are you interested in? Like, what do you see yourself doing?
I see myself becoming a programmer, but I'm still figuring out exactly like what part of the STEM field I want to go into, but I definitely like coding. And I'm very fascinated by AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, like I wouldn't say it's necessarily just okay, you're gonna have the foundation object-oriented programming. Doesn't really matter what language you learn. Right now it's Python. Definitely that's a big foundation. But then at that point, like I would honestly say like if you like beef up your like if you take these classes, like what really helped me, I took a speech class, and that basically being able to communicate what I want to talk about really helped me. But also like technical writing, I had to take these technical writing courses, and really learning how to communicate ideas through, you know, a medium of writing helped me a lot. But end of the day, it's just like where I got to where I was just pure like, you know, confidence. And like that confidence, you know, it's fake it till you make it. Like I was all the calls I've done, all the stuff I've done, just super nerve wracking. But end of the day, I was like, you know, who cares? Like if I mess up, I mess up. And so once you have those foundations, you know, just object-oriented programming, I would say definitely writing, good communication skills, you pretty much can go wherever you want in product. Um, because if you can communicate well, versus someone who can be, you know, like for me, I beat out this one person from my current startup who has 10 years of experience designing for AI at IBM Watson, which IBM Watson is a leader of AI, and IBM's a huge company, and also was a director of product design at Apple. And I beat that person out is because my communication skills, my ability to work in other stuff. So I'd say if you can really work on something that differentiates yourself from just programming, because you know at the end of the day, everyone can program. Like what's going to set you apart, and it's going to be that communication skills. Great question, by the way.
Great, thank you. That's really useful advice.
Any other questions? Go ahead. I mean, you got them, Clarissa. You got them, right? I mean, this is
Yeah, one-on-one.
How did you know that this was what you wanted to do, or like that was the path that you wanted to go into?
Yeah. So I think it started at a really young age. Like I honestly, as a kid, I've always been really, really curious about things. Like I would used to take apart the vacuum and put it together. And like when I was like in fifth grade, I was really into like welding and soldering. So I was creating these circuits and like trip alarms and all that stuff in my mom's house. And you'd really pissed off at me. But just like the curiosity of like learning, and like I love to learn about things. And just reading, and also like I was a very like I love to read about, you know, nonfiction, all these different processes. And like I think my favorite show was like How It's Made. Like it's a really boring show about like how like things are made, like guitars. And like I was fascinated by it. And so I always had this like burning curiosity. Um, and also I love to solve problems. And like when I got into like I was very fortunate to have the connections that I did to get into product management. And like I treat it as like this curiosity of like how can I make something better. And then I started, you know, I loved brainstorming all these things. And like, that's when problem solving came in. And basically the ability to take all this information, like you read all this stuff, research, and then you synthesize it into something very bite sizable and like very understandable. And then from there, you can start generating these ideas. Like, how do I solve this? And then just like kind of going off the wire of like, I want to be able to solve for this. And then as I started getting into like these internships and stuff, I realized that I want to basically tackle the hardest problems like known to mankind. And like it sounds very cliche, but like even at St. Francis, like the hardest, like I did okay in the classes I didn't care about, but I did amazing in the classes I was really interested in. And so same with college is like I wanted to tackle these huge problems because that'd be really cool to have your name on. Like I just create this whole thing, like I'm well known. And so that's when I saw like AI. Whoa, like that's like the next frontier. And so I wanted to combine my curiosity, my problem solving, and then, you know, treat for AI. And that's like my major really helped me is like because you're problem solving all the time. And like the way you problem solve is through design. And like design is just accumulation of these stories of, you know, all this research. And so once you have this research, then you can basically, you know, create this really cool solutions, and then you present it in front of them. It's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's a little ego boosting thing too. But yeah, like if you are like really, I would say like love to problem solve, like you love like just throwing yourself head in at hard problems. And it's like, I'm not saying it's super daunting. Like it's scary. It's like if you like success is scary too. It's like if you really want to like be serious about yourself. And also like another thing is like if you're really trying to like honestly do what I've done, and like I'm gonna, you know, brag a little bit, like not that many people have gotten to where I'm at. I'm only 23. And like I'm designing for this leading AI program in like the nation. And like you're gonna have people like kind of be little naysayers, like kind of scoff at you. They're like, oh, there's no chance you can do that, and like it's cheesy, but it is true. People are like, wow, you're really going after something big. I'm like, yeah, I am, and it's scary, but ultimately, if like just trust yourself, that you can ultimately come out on top. And even if you do, I've had setbacks. Like, just pick yourself up and just keep grinding. That's what I would recommend.
Cool. So are you like designing the AI platform, or like what do you do per se if you're not like programming it? I'm having a hard time like
Yeah, I have something. If you, I don't know how much time we have, but I can show you.
Grab whatever you want. I mean, I'm just learning here. So this is great for me. I'm good.
Here, I'll share my screen. Let me know if you can see.
Yeah.
It says study groups.
Mhm.
Yep.
So essentially, every designer has to have a thing called a portfolio. And so a portfolio is essentially like accumulation of all the work you've done. I can zoom in a little bit. So like, for example, I mentioned before, I worked with UW to basically recreate their online learning platform. And so if you see over here, this is all design. Like we designed all of this. I was in a team of UX designers. And so like what you do is typically you start with this challenge called design challenge. And so for instance, you have a problem you're trying to solve. And so the challenge is, so our challenge with this, we wanted to motivate students to find friends and collaborate in online courses, because right now during the pandemic, it's pretty lonely. Like, I don't know, like if you're in a brand new online course, especially in college, like you don't know anyone, it sucks. It's because you really want to work with people. And so we basically wanted to help people find friends on these online platforms and also collaborate. And so what we ultimately did is that this is like the final product. I can just walk. We did basically a bunch of research and we did this thing called user interviews. Um, so like typically like what Mr. Calcani is interviewing me right now, I'd be doing with potential users. And so you do this research, and then you do this user research techniques called like affinity diagramming. It's a whole field called like it's a lot of anthropology based, and you learn how to basically synthesize all this qualitative data into structured data that you can then inform your designs or requirements with. So basically, we took all these user interviews, did this thing called qualitative coding, which basically you tag these bits of information with emotion. And then you basically create a design questions like how might we design an online experience for students to collaborate with these top ideas. It's a lot very science-based too. You do like a lot of stats work, and you verify concepts. And so this relates to like my job currently, and this is what the day-to-day I go to. I just can't show some of the stuff I'm working on. And so you start like literally with like really bad sketches, and then like you work through all this stuff. Like this is called a user. Oh well. Let me reload this. Like this is called a user flow. Basically, you're creating a whole flow of how a student might work through your application. Like for Facebook case, like when you log in, how do you post? How do you do X, Y, and Z? Then you create this thing called low fidelity wireframes. You iterate, you test, and you iterate, and then you basically create this final design that we handed off to engineering. And so like my job is basically right now is currently or what I do is like I meet with engineering, I meet with customers, I figure out what's feasible in terms of like AI. Like, hey, this is what we can do with AI. We can, do X, Y, and Z. I take that, I then go interview customers to see like what their pain points are. I then come together, create a general requirement with what the customer needs, but also with the limitations of what AI can do. And then I ultimately come up with the design. I test this design, and then I help deliver the design in terms of managing what the engineers are working on, and seeing like what, like also the roadmap, like when are we going to deliver this feature? When will this customer have this feature? And how are you basically going to measure the success of this feature? So it's also a lot of organization, a lot of management in terms of what I personally do. But if you're looking more from like the AI side of things, you're going to be working on like you almost want to become a data scientist. Data science is a huge thing if you purely want to do that, but you can also start with software engineering. But if you want to do data science, again, recommend doing Udemy because that's the foundation. Like data is the foundation of AI. Then you can learn how to build models. But yeah, so I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, so in a way you're kind of like the spokesperson for the AI and kind of connect like
Yeah.
companies and then the like producers. I don't know, for lack of a better word, kind of.
So like I'm taking on like all the work of like understanding what people need and then adapting those needs to AI. Like I tell what the engineers like this is what we need to do X, Y, and Z. And then I help design basically what the whole experience will be. And then they'll connect, like we'll call that the front end, which is like HTML and CSS. And then the back end, that's when the hardcore engineers come in and they route everything. And then we all come together. It's a whole collaborative process.
Nice. Awesome.
Sweet. Well, definitely all great questions, by the way.
Yeah, very good. Go ahead. You got another one?
I think that's it. But if I have any more, is there a way I can contact you?
Yeah. So, Mr. Falcone, do you mind sending out my?
Yeah. Yes. Just reach out to me and then I'll send out Alex's contact info.
Okay, cool.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Well, this has been great, super informative, really appreciate it. Alex, like if I get it, again, we'll put this on the website, people will take a look at it, and then I will send them out. They can reach out to me and I will send out your contact info, but very, very fun to listen and hear your story, Alex, and appreciate your words of wisdom. You are very experienced, not very old compared to some people on this call, but you got a lot of great things packed into a very short life so far. But you know, I love what you had to say, and hopefully, you know, everybody listens and takes those risks and you know, not afraid to fail and does a lot of different internships and enjoys their time. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I've had a great time. You know,
Alex.
everyone loves talking about themselves.
You have a lot to say, a lot of interesting things and great advice, and we really appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Alex, thank you. Thanks for reaching out to us, buddy.
Of course.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.